Hi, I'm Douglas Kirk, and welcome to the Reality Paradox. Tonight we're going to talk about the self-fulfilling prophecy. You experience what you believe. Would you be willing to go to sleep and spend the night next to this grave? Welcome to Reality Paradox. I'm laying here in an old cemetery, it looks like. I'm not far from a highway, but this is one of these small family plots that are scattered all over these ranches in the Texas Hill Country. I'm laying beside the grave because I'm wondering whether or not I have the guts to spend the night here. Now, I'm not laying on the grave because I do have respect for the person that was buried here over 100 years ago. Now, below this ground, we would guess maybe 4, 5, 6 feet deep are somebody's bones. And the only way we know that is because of the grave marker that's there. There's a thing in psychology called the self-fulfilling prophecy. The self-fulfilling prophecy controls what you see and what you think you see. It says that you tend to see what you want to see. You experience what you believe. So if I believe that there's a dead person in the ground near me, then I should be scared. But I'm not scared. Although I'm not sure if I would sleep here. I'm only a few hundred feet away from a highway, so if I did fall asleep and maybe I woke up in the middle of the night and got scared, I could run to the highway and flag somebody down and it would all be safe. But why is it that I'm not willing to lay down on the grave itself? I feel a sense of respect for the deceased. Now, if this guy is dead, dust to dust, and there's nothing that happens after a person dies, then it shouldn't make any difference. 100 years has passed, and there's probably not even bones left. And yet I'm not willing to walk on the grave. I'm not willing to lay on the grave. I don't even know if I want to fall asleep near the grave. Now, why wouldn't you want to fall asleep near a grave? Is it because there's some fear that something might still be around? That there might be a spirit? I don't know, that's a tough call. I'm an experimental psychologist, and I'm a skeptic. I don't believe things that I can't prove. And yet there's so much circumstantial evidence, it just keeps piling up and piling up, that there are spirits, that there are things other than what we see as flesh and blood human beings. I can't prove it, but I tend to believe it. Does that make me a mystic? That I believe in things I can't see and I can't prove? The fact of the matter is, when it comes to the field of psychology, most psychologists won't even study the subject. When I was in graduate school, I kept asking my professors, when are we going to study the paranormal? And they kept saying, no, we're not going to study that because it's not scientific. There's no way to study it. Well, of course, I disagreed. And I said to them, if we're not qualified to study the paranormal as psychologists, who is? And we were in graduate school. When people stood on the coastline in Europe and watched ships sail out to sea, and they assumed that if they sailed too far, they would fall off the edge of the earth. They thought the earth was flat based upon their observations. But there were men that said, no, it's not flat. The earth is not flat. And there were people who were willing to test out that hypothesis. So they got in their sailing ships and they sailed and sailed and sailed until eventually some of them discovered new land masses that they didn't know anything about. And all of a sudden, the world that used to be flat was round. Today, in the field of psychology, the world is flat. People are not willing to study those things that we think might be true, but we're a bit afraid of. And so we continue to think that anything that is paranormal or the parapsychological isn't real. And yet we know it is. There have been studies that have proven that telepathy exists. That's fascinating. You mean we can read each other's minds through the air? And what they found is that distance is irrelevant. It doesn't matter how far a person is away, you can actually read his thoughts mentally. Now, the studies that were done years ago, they would put a screen up between two individuals, and they would lay out 4 playing cards, ace, king, queen, whatever, jack. They would just pick them at random, and both sides, both subjects, one on each side of the screen, would get the same cards. So the person who was intending to send the telepathic message would pick one of the 4 cards. Then the receiver on the other side of the screen, he couldn't see what was going on, and they weren't allowed to talk or make any noise. He had to attempt to pick the card that the sender was sending to him. Now, without any telepathy at all, you would get 25% correct, 1 in 4, just random chance, 1 in 4. However, what they found is that some subjects got not only 50% correct, but sometimes 75% correct. They were actually able to read minds. Telepathy exists. Interesting thing about the studies, too, is that they found that the younger the subjects, the higher the success rate. Children were better at it than adults. Now, why would that be? Well, presumably, as adults, we're told telepathy doesn't exist, therefore it doesn't. Self-fulfilling prophecy. You experience what you believe. You see what you want to see. Well, if that's the case, if you don't believe that there's anything paranormal in the world, then you're never going to see it. It's there in front of you. You just won't recognize it. You will continue to think that the world is flat. And yet it's not flat. We're finding out that things such as telepathy exist. Things such as telekinesis exist. That's the ability to move objects with your mind. Remote viewing exists. You can actually travel with your mental ability to other locations and look around and gather information from what you see and then come back mentally, and you have information that is fairly accurate. That's been studied a lot. As a matter of fact, the Central Intelligence Agency in the United States had a program that went on for something like 23 years. They worked with Stanford University, and they also worked with the U.S. Army, the U.S. Navy, NASA. Everybody was studying this phenomenon. And then the CIA abruptly said, it doesn't work, we're not doing it anymore. Well, do you believe that? Do you believe that the CIA would invest millions of dollars in 23 years in studying a phenomenon and then suddenly announce it doesn't work? Well, it does work. Remote viewing does work. And there are remote viewing programs all over the world run by different governments. Now the next question is, do you have advanced remote viewing? Can you physically go to the location you're looking at? Can you project your body to this other location? And when you're there, can you manipulate the environment? We're talking about mentally, totally mentally. You don't ever leave the chair you're sitting in. Some would say that's a form of astral projection. The world is not flat. If you look at the human being, he is an electrochemical organism. You take in certain nutrition in the form of food, your body breaks it down, it creates what it needs, builds the building blocks of what it needs, it fuels the system. It makes your organs work and your muscles work, and it makes your nervous system work, your brain. If you supply the proper nutrition to the human body is capable of many spectacular feats. We were designed to have senses, and we've got senses that everybody knows about, the sense of taste and smell and vision, audition, ability to hear. But we also have senses inside our body. And these senses, we don't talk about much. Scientists are very much aware that they exist, and they're well studied. Senses that tell you where, for instance, your arm is in space in relation to the rest of your body. So you can close your eye, and with your eyes closed, you can touch your nose. Think about that. How do you do that? Well, it's because of the interior senses that exist within your body that tell you the pressure that you have on your organs and your muscles, gives you a sense of where your limbs are in relation to the rest of your body. You couple the interior senses with the exterior senses, sense of sight, for instance, then you can keep track of what's going on not only within your body, but around your body. And that's a survival mechanism. You need to be able to do those things in order to survive. Find food, get away from danger. Your senses are required for that. Well, there's another kind of senses that we almost never talk about because the earth is still flat. Those are the connection senses. This is the energy that goes from where you are located in time and space in your body. Your energy can actually reach out to other locations. That's how telepathy works. It's a connection sense. That's how remote viewing works. It's a connection sense. And apparently, we're all born with connection senses the same way we're born with a sense of sight, for example. We all have it. It's interesting to note that people who lose their sight, their other senses actually become more enhanced. They hear better. You can talk to anybody that's lost their sight. They'll tell you that. Because these other senses compensate for the loss of a particular sense. Why don't we explore that in the laboratory with respect to connection senses? Why don't we look at individuals who have lost certain senses and see if they're better at telepathy? See if they're better at remote viewing. See if they're better at astral projection. There's so much that can be studied, but first we have to get over the idea that psychologists are not qualified to talk about the paranormal. Who better? So as I lay in this graveyard next to this grave that's been here over 100 years, can I connect with the spirit that was associated with that person? Well, first of all, you have to ask the question, do we have a spirit? And I think many people agree that we do. Can you prove it? There was a study one time where a guy was interested in weighing the body when a person died. And he would take into account their last breath. He put them on a very accurate scale, waited till they were about to die, and measured their weight, accounted for their last breath where they would exhale a lungful of air. And he said that people would lose a certain amount of weight that he couldn't account for upon death. And he said, that must be the soul or the spirit leaving the body. He was literally trying to weigh the soul. Now, I don't know if I buy that. I don't know if soul has weight. I don't know if a spirit has some kind of form that you could measure. I don't know. Maybe so. There are so many stories people tell where they have loved ones who pass away, and they're visited by that loved one, maybe once, maybe twice, right after the death. It's like the person comes back to say goodbye, or maybe comes back to set something straight, to apologize, or to offer forgiveness. Now, is this the self-fulfilling prophecy where maybe we feel a little bit guilty about something and a person dies and we never apologized or we never said anything, and so then the person dies and that spirit comes back and we get a chance to make it right? But there is no spirit and it never really happens. We just want to believe that because of the self-fulfilling prophecy. I don't know. I had a friend one time who was a really terrific defense attorney. And he was an older man. He was about 70, I think. And I was going to write a newspaper article about him and publish it in order to kind of honor him and also drive some business toward his practice. And so I interviewed him and I took a bunch of pictures, and time went by. I didn't get it done immediately, and then he died. Suddenly he died. Unexpectedly he died. He was actually at the office when he was talking with clients, and he started talking gibberish, and they got up and they went to his partner and they said, "Hey, there's something wrong with him." So they rushed him to the hospital, and as it turned out, he had a very rare brain infection. And within a couple of days, he was dead. I didn't know this, but I had a dream about him. He came to me in the dream, and he said laughingly, "Well, I guess you don't need to do that article now." And I didn't know what that meant. The next day, his partner called me and said, "Hey, he died," and told me the story. Now, almost everybody you meet has a story like that. And it is, after all, just a story. What does it mean? Is it self-fulfilling prophecy? Are we just trying to comfort ourselves? Or do spirits actually come back and talk to people and make them feel better? And then they go on. And then you hear stories about spirits who can't seem to cross. A lot of times we talk about locations being haunted. And I've got a story that'll just blow your mind, which we'll save for a future episode of Reality Paradox. There are people that come back or that are stuck. I've been in association with 3 people who have had contact with this individual, one of whom actually identified her in a 16-person photo lineup. She had this individual come to her in a series of extremely vivid dreams in association with a grave marker that we had looked at. So I laid out 16 photos in a blind test, and within about a minute or a minute and a half, she was able to pick out the person who appeared in her dream. She had never seen her before, other than in the dream, and that person is the one that was associated with that particular grave that had been identified by a previous individual as belonging to a young child about whom the mother was very distressed because there had been an injustice. Is this just a story? Or is this the reality paradox? I'm Douglas Kirk, and I hope you'll join me next time as we delve further into this extremely bizarre tale. Man, I can't read this at all. There's no telling how long this has been here. There are other graves here that go back into the 1890s, so I know that these are 100 years old. Wonder who's buried here.